We don't have that kind of money lying around, Anna. You need to be realistic about this. My father's voice rang out, deep and steady, cutting through the silence in their kitchen. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his expression as hard as if he were closing a business negotiation, nothing more. Standing beside him, my mother nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. I sat frozen at the dining table, my daughter Lily's medical file lying between us like a silent accusation. She was at home with the babysitter, probably asleep in her small room, her breathing fragile and weak. On the first page of the file, a number was circled in red ink: $70,000. Realistic? My voice cracked, sounding foreign even to myself. My daughter could die without this therapy. The doctor said the success rate is over 60%. 60%. That's a real chance. It's still experimental, Anna, my mother interjected, her voice deceptively gentle. What if it doesn't work? We have to think about the risk. I'm not asking you to give it to me, I pleaded, desperation coiling in my chest. I'm asking for a loan. I'll sign papers. I'll do anything. I'll pay back every single penny. My father shook his head, a decisive gesture that extinguished all hope. You're already struggling to make ends meet. How could you possibly pay us back? Be sensible, Anna. Sometimes in life, people have to learn to accept things. He spoke of accepting the death of his 6-year-old granddaughter as casually as if he were talking about accepting a failed investment. We have to think about our old age too, my mother added, as if to reinforce the fortress they had built. Our retirement fund. It's not infinite. I looked at them, the two people who had spent their entire lives building a world of comfort and security for themselves. And in that moment, I understood that the wall of safety they had built was tall enough to protect them, but not wide enough to shelter their own granddaughter. They had made their choice. And that choice was not Lily. The days following that refusal passed in a fog. I went to work, cared for Lily, smiled at her, but my mind was empty. The feeling of abandonment was heavy, a coldness that was even worse than the fear of my daughter's illness. I hadn't contacted my parents again. What was there to say? Plead? Scream? It was all pointless. On Saturday, I had to go back to my parents' house to pick up a spare nebulizer I had left there the week before. I had hoped they would be out. But as I walked in through the unlocked back door, I heard my mother on the phone in the living room, her voice high-pitched and laced with pride. Oh, of course I was worried. But it's over now. Thankfully, we were just able to help Leo out of a huge jam. He lost $210,000 because the market crashed, but it's okay. Money is for taking care of your children. He's young. We have to help him get back on his feet. $210,000. The number hit my ears like a thunderclap. My entire body went rigid. The air was stolen from my lungs. $21,000. 3 times the amount I had begged for to save my daughter's life. That's right, my mother continued, oblivious to my presence. There are risks with investing. But the boy has big ambitions. We have to support him. His father said this is an investment in the whole family's future. I couldn't listen anymore. I walked into the living room. My mother saw me and jumped, her face changing color. Anna, when did you get here? She hastily ended the call. 21,000? I repeated, my voice hoarse. My mother stammered. You heard. It's complicated. Complicated? A white-hot rage erupted from my deepest core, incinerating the pain and numbness of the past few days. What's so complicated about you telling me you have no money, only to turn around and throw away 3 times that amount to cover one of Leo's gambles? My father heard the commotion and came out of his study. Seeing my expression, he understood immediately. Leo's situation is different, he said instantly, his voice defensive. That was an investment in the future. An investment? I let out a bitter laugh. You call losing over $200,000 in investment? While Lily's 60% chance of survival is just a risk? He's a man. My mother cut in, and her reasoning was crueler than silence. Failure would affect his whole life. As for little Lily, her illness is fate, Anna. We can't just throw money out the window. Fate! I screamed. So Leo's future is worth gambling the family fortune on, but my daughter's life is just fate? They fell silent, unable to offer a more logical excuse, and in that silence, I saw it all clearly. This wasn't about logic. This was about choice. They had chosen their son. They always would. That evening, I called Leo. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a little remorse, a little shame. But what I got was worse. "I'm sorry, Anna," he said, his voice sounding sad but feeling empty. "I really didn't want things to turn out this way." "Oh, really?" I replied, my voice like ice. "Then why did you take $21,000 from Mom and Dad when you knew I needed $7,000 to save my daughter?" There was a short pause. Then Leo sighed, a dramatic, calculated breath. "I'll try to earn the money back to help you, I promise. But you see, Mom and Dad believe in my potential. Dad said this is the way for our whole family to get ahead. Don't disappoint them." And just like that, he twisted everything. He turned his selfishness into my burden, his greed into the family's hope, and me, the mother fighting for her child's life, into the obstacle, the one who would disappoint Mom and Dad. I hung up without another word. I sat in the dark, unable to cry. The feeling of absolute solitude enveloped me. I wasn't just fighting an illness, I was fighting my own family. Desperation is a strange stimulant. After the shock of the confrontation with my family, I didn't collapse. Instead, a frenzied energy rose up inside me. If they wouldn't help, I would do it myself. I started an online fundraising campaign. I spent an entire night writing, pouring my heart and soul into every word. I told Lily's story, posted photos of her radiant smile from before she got sick, and shared the fragile hope of the gene therapy. I cast aside all shame and pride, sharing the link across every social media platform, sending it to friends, colleagues, and even old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. Small donations began to trickle in, a few dozen dollars from an old high school friend, $100 from the dean at my workplace. Every notification that appeared on my phone was a glimmer of hope. After a week, I had nearly $8,000. It was a respectable amount, but still just a drop in the ocean. In the midst of this, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw a new post from Leo. He was sitting in a fancy restaurant, a glittering watch on his wrist that I knew for a fact was an expensive brand. The caption read, "Rewarding myself after some turbulent days. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for always believing in me." Below, my mother had commented with a series of heart emojis. "My dear son deserves the best." A bitter anger coiled inside me. Rewarding himself. He was rewarding himself for his own failure with money that could have saved his niece. And my mother, the woman who told me her retirement fund was not infinite, was cheering on his extravagance as if it were a victory. I took a screenshot of the post. Not for any specific reason, just as a reflex. It was another piece of evidence of their cruel absurdity. That weekend, my mother called, insisting that Lily and I come over for dinner. "The family needs to be together during times like this," she said, her voice dripping with hypocrisy. I wanted to refuse, but a stubborn part of me still held on, hoping that if they saw Lily, saw how she was weakening day by day, maybe they would change. It was a mistake. The dinner was painfully awkward. Lily was tired, sitting quietly in her chair and barely eating anything. But my parents and Leo seemed not to notice. Their entire conversation revolved around Leo's new investment opportunities, pretentiously throwing around terms like NFTs and metaverse. You'll have to help me with a little more, Leo said in the middle of chewing a piece of steak. There's this one project with huge potential. If we get in early, we could multiply our assets 10 times over in just a few months. Let's take it slow, my father said, but his eyes lit up with interest. I couldn't take it anymore. Lily had more trouble breathing today, I cut in. The doctor is worried about her lung function. My mother frowned, putting her fork down. Let's not talk about sickness at the dinner table, Anna. You're always so pessimistic. You need to have some faith. This isn't about being pessimistic or optimistic, I replied, my voice trembling with anger. This is the reality, and I'm still more than $60,000 short. Money again, she sighed, glancing at my father as if I were an unbearable burden. You're ruining the mood for everyone. That night, Lily developed a high fever and began to struggle violently for breath. Her lips turned pale. I panicked and called 911, and while waiting for the ambulance, I tremblingly dialed my mother's number. Mom, I sobbed when she picked up. Lily, she can't breathe. We're on our way to the emergency room. Oh God, my mother's voice came through, but it sounded distracted. Listen, Anna, I'm really busy right now. I'm at a blockchain seminar with Leo. It's very important. There are even speakers from Silicon Valley. Call your father if you need anything. I have to go. She hung up before I could say another word. Very important. A seminar about cryptocurrency. More important than her granddaughter who was fighting for her life in an ambulance. At that moment, sitting on the cold floor next to my gasping daughter, I finally understood. I hadn't just lost their help. I had lost them completely. The following days in the hospital were a hazy blur of beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic, and the whispered conversations of nurses. Lily grew visibly weaker. She no longer had the strength to read stories or color, lying listlessly in her hospital bed, her big round eyes staring into the distance. Finally, Dr. Miller, who had been monitoring Lily from the beginning, called me into his office. He didn't need to say much. I could read the terrible news in the tired sadness of his eyes. We've missed the window of opportunity, Anna, he said gently. Her condition has deteriorated too quickly. Even if we had the money now, her body wouldn't be strong enough to receive the gene therapy. I am so sorry. He went on to talk about palliative care, about making her comfortable in her final days. I nodded, but none of his words truly registered. All I could hear was the sound of a door slamming shut. The last door of hope had been closed right in my face, and I knew who had locked it. Lily passed away on a Tuesday afternoon, in my arms. She went peacefully, like a candle flame flickering out in the wind. The moment her last breath left her small chest, a part of me died with her. After making the necessary calls to the funeral home, I dialed my mother's number. It took her a moment to pick up. Hello. Lily's gone, Mom, I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then I heard my mother take a breath. Oh no, that poor child. She paused, and I waited for a word of comfort, an inquiry, anything. But her next sentence left me numb. Well, Leo just made a big new investment. This news will probably upset him and break his concentration. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about Lily's final moments. Her first concern was the feelings and focus of her golden boy. Her deceased granddaughter was merely a potential distraction from her son's money-making career. Lily's funeral was held on a bleak Friday. Only a few close friends, my colleagues, and Lily's babysitter attended. It was a small, quiet service, just like her short life. My parents and Leo arrived nearly half an hour late. They walked into the chapel after the service had already begun, causing an unnecessary disruption. My father wore a brightly patterned shirt, while Leo was in a polo shirt, looking as if he'd just come from the golf course. Only my mother wore a black dress, but it was too chic. too inappropriate for the somber atmosphere. They sat in the back row and barely looked at me. They stayed only for the main service. As soon as people began to stand up, my father approached me, patting my shoulder lightly. "I have to take Leo to the airport," he said, his voice rushed. "He has an important crypto conference in Miami he can't miss." "So sorry." I looked at him, then at Leo. He avoided my gaze. A conference. So important that he couldn't stay another hour to say a final goodbye to his niece, to comfort his sister. They didn't even ask about the small reception I had prepared at my home after the funeral. They turned and left, leaving me alone amidst the condolences of my friends. Watching their backs as they disappeared through the chapel doors, I no longer felt pain, not even anger. There was only a cold, hollow emptiness. They had made their choice. They chose the conference. They chose the money. They chose Leo. And I, too, had made a choice. I chose that I would never forget, and I would never forgive. My apartment became terrifyingly quiet. The silence wasn't empty. It was a tangible, heavy presence, filling every space that was once occupied by Lily's laughter, by her calls of, "Mommy." I walked into her room, where everything was still untouched. The dollhouse, the neatly arranged crayons, the princess dress she loved most hanging on the closet door. This place was once my whole world. Now, it was a memorial. On the small table beside her bed sat a towering stack of medical bills, cruel reminders of a battle I had lost. I sat down on the floor, leaning against her bed, a feeling of utter exhaustion overwhelming my body and soul. The pain was too immense. It was beyond tears. It was just a cold, hollow feeling. I opened my phone, almost instinctively. The screen lit up, displaying Leo's Instagram page that I had seen earlier. The latest photo had been posted 2 hours ago. Leo was smiling brightly, a cocktail in his hand, with the blue sea of Miami behind him. The caption read, "Connecting and Building the Future at the SAG Crypto Beach 2025 Conference. Amazing energy." It was posted while I was standing in front of my daughter's grave. Something inside me broke. Not out of weakness, but the final layer of hardened numbness finally cracked, revealing a core of cold steel within. The pain didn't disappear. It crystallized. It transformed into something else, sharper, more focused. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the living room, and opened my laptop. The light from the screen illuminated my emotionless face. I created a new folder on the desktop. I paused for a second, then typed its name. Evidence. First, I saved the screenshot of Leo's post from Miami. Then I dragged in the photo of him showing off his expensive watch. I opened my email, found the exchanges with Dr. Miller about the $7,000 cost. Saved. I opened my call history, took a screenshot of the brief call with my mother on the night Lily was hospitalized. I opened a text file and documented every day, every conversation, every refusal, every excuse they had given me. May 16th, met with parents, asked for a $7,000 loan, denied. Reasons: don't have it lying around, too risky, have to save for old age. May 20th, overheard mom on the phone, gave Leo $21,000 to cover crypto losses. Reason: an investment in the future. Every line I typed was another brick in a solid wall I was building inside myself. That wall contained the bottomless grief and turned it into fuel. This was no longer a sad story. This was an indictment. I would not collapse in this silent apartment. I would not let them continue their extravagant lives as if Lily never existed, as if their choices had no consequences. They had taught me a costly lesson about the value of a life in their eyes. Now I would prepare a lesson of my own. I didn't know how long it would take. A year, 5 years, 10 years. But I would wait. I would rebuild my life. I would become stronger. And I would wait. I would wait for the day I could make them face every piece of evidence in this folder. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. For Lily. Part 2. The Coming Storm. 4 years is a strangely long and short amount of time. Long enough for the pain to no longer be an open wound bleeding every day, but to have scabbed over, scarred, and become a calloused part of who I am. But it was also too short for me to forget Lily's face, or the sound of her voice. I did not fall apart. I did the opposite. I turned my pain into discipline. I worked double shifts, taking every assignment others refused. 2 years ago, I was promoted to head nurse of the pediatric ward. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, a clean, minimalist space, free from the ghosts of memories. My life revolved around my work and an almost ascetic discipline. I saved every penny, not because I was struggling, but for a purpose that only I knew. The pain didn't disappear. It had become my engine. Throughout those 4 years, I didn't speak a single word to my parents or my brother. Nor did they to me. To the world, we were strangers. But I never truly took my eyes off them. My Aunt Teresa, my mother's sister, was the only relative who kept in touch with me. She was a good person. She had sent flowers to Lily's funeral and still called occasionally to ask if I was okay. She didn't know about my plan, but through her casual chats, I pieced together a complete picture of their lives. And it was a good life. A year after Lily's death, they sold their old house and bought a larger, more modern villa in a gated community. My mother proudly told Aunt Teresa it was thanks to Leo's big investment win. Leo, their golden boy, continued his gambles. He dived into NFTs, then a ridiculous metaverse art gallery. Every project failed, but each time my parents would pump more money in. "You have to give him a chance to learn from his mistakes," my mother explained to Aunt Teresa. I followed my mother on social media through an anonymous account. She constantly posted photos of European vacations, dinners at 5-star restaurants, and expensive bottles of wine. Amidst those pictures were photos of Leo, always smiling next to a new car or a flashy piece of tech. "So proud of my son Leo conquering the tech world," she wrote. Not once, in all 4 years, did she mention Lily. It was as if she had never existed. Her first granddaughter had been erased from the family narrative. Every piece of information, every boastful photo, every lie, I quietly saved. The evidence folder on my computer grew thicker. It was no longer just proof of their betrayal. It was now proof of the illusion they had built. A shallow empire erected on the ashes of my daughter's life. And I knew that empires like that, sooner or later, would crumble. I just had to be patient and wait. The fall didn't come like a roaring storm. It arrived on a quiet Wednesday evening through a phone call. I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift, my body aching with exhaustion, and was about to heat up some leftovers. My phone screen lit up, displaying Aunt Teresa. Her voice was no longer cheerful or gossipy as it usually was. It was hesitant and worried. "Anna, there's something I have to tell you." I leaned against the kitchen counter, waiting in silence. I had a strange feeling that this was the call I had been waiting for the past 4 years. "It's your parents and Leo," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "They've lost everything, Anna. Wiped clean." She recounted the story in disjointed pieces, fragments she had patched together from tearful phone calls with my mother. Leo had poured all of his money, and worse, the entirety of the savings and retirement funds my parents had entrusted to him, into a crypto project that promised to change the world. Last week, the project's founders had suddenly vanished. The website went down. All the money evaporated. A classic scam that people in the crypto world call a rug pull. Their shallow empire had crumbled overnight. "Your father is devastated," Aunt Teresa sobbed. Your mother just cries all the time. They're going to lose the house, Anna. The bank is going to foreclose. I don't know what to do. I understand, I replied, my voice disturbingly calm. My calmness seemed to surprise her. Are you okay, Anna? I'm fine, Aunt Teresa. Thank you for letting me know. After hanging up, I didn't eat dinner. I sat down at my computer, my hands perfectly steady. I didn't trust simple hearsay. I needed proof. I went to the county's public records website and navigated to the public foreclosure notices. I typed in the address of the villa my mother had always been so proud of. And there it was, in black and white. Notice of foreclosure. Owners, my father's and mother's names. Lender, Bank of America. Amount overdue, nearly $250,000. Scheduled auction date, within the next 60 days. I sat there staring at the screen. I didn't feel joy, not a shred of satisfaction. There was only a cold, hollow emptiness and a sense of grim, inevitable justice at work. It was like watching a rotting building collapse under its own weight. They had bet their future on their golden boy, and now the bet had come due. The storm had arrived, and it was washing everything away in its path. I closed the laptop. Now I just had to wait for the knock on the door. I didn't have to wait long. 10 days after Aunt Teresa's call, the knock came on a Sunday evening. It was a timid, hesitant knock, nothing like the confident sound of the former owners of that house. I looked through the peephole, and there they were, all three of them. 4 years had worn them down cruelly. My father looked a decade older, his hair white, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. My mother, who always took such pride in her appearance, was now gaunt, her eyes swollen and her face etched with anxious wrinkles. But the one who had changed the most was Leo. The golden boy of yesterday now looked listless, his eyes evasive, his arrogance gone, replaced by the frightened look of a man who had lost everything. I unfastened the security latch and opened the door, but only a crack, just enough for them to see me and for me to see them. I stood there, blocking the entrance. Anna, my father began, his voice hoarse. I remained silent, looking at them. My apartment, though small, was clean and tidy. It was a symbol of the life I had rebuilt for myself from the ashes. And they stood outside my threshold like beggars. The reversal of our positions was perfectly ironic. Can we come in and talk? My mother asked, her voice trembling. No, I replied, my voice cold and firm. They flinched at my blunt refusal. Leo stared down at the floor, not daring to look at me. Anna, please, my father begged. We're in serious trouble. You're the family's only hope. Only hope? I almost laughed. I remembered the day my only hope had been mercilessly extinguished by them. We need help. My mother sobbed, tears beginning to stream down her face. The bank. They're going to take the house. We'll have nowhere to go. They said we owe $250,000. $250,000. Such a mocking figure. It encompassed Leo's failed investment and probably the penalty interest as well. I looked each of them in the eye, my silence heavier than any accusation. I wanted them to stew in their discomfort, in the humiliation of having to come and beg from the daughter, the sister, they had abandoned. Finally, I spoke, my voice flat and emotionless. I need time to think. A flicker of hope ignited in their eyes. This weekend, I dictated. Saturday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Come here, all three of you. We'll talk. Okay, we'll be there. My father agreed hastily, as if afraid I would change my mind. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I didn't respond to his thanks. I simply slammed the door shut, engaged the security latch, and leaned against the cold wood. I could hear their stumbling, desperate footsteps retreating down the hallway. The stage was set. The scene was ready. It was time for the curtain to fall. On Saturday, at 2 o'clock sharp, they arrived. I was ready. My apartment was so tidy it felt cold. There wasn't a single superfluous item in sight. On the only coffee table in the living room, I had placed a single beige file folder. Just that one object. When I opened the door, they entered timidly, the three of them huddled together as if seeking safety from the very people who had collectively caused their disaster. They sat down on my old sofa, looking utterly out of place amidst the room's minimalism. I remained standing, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, a position of power. I had learned that from my father. "You need $250,000, I began, without a single greeting or pleasantry. My voice was flat, without inflection. "We know it's a lot of money, Anna," my father said quickly. "But we'll sign papers, we'll pay it all back." "Be quiet," I cut him off. He was stunned, having never been spoken to that way by me. "Now, it's my turn to talk." I walked to the coffee table and picked up the file. I opened it, and the silence in the room became so thick you could only hear the rustling of paper. "Let's start here," I said, placing a sheet of paper on the table in front of them. It was a copy of Dr. Miller's letter, with the cost of the gene therapy clearly circled. $70,000, to save Lily's life. "You said you didn't have it." My mother started to sniffle. I ignored her. I placed a second sheet down next to the first. A copy of a bank statement that Aunt Teresa had unknowingly sent me long ago. It showed a wire transfer of $210,000 from my parents' savings account to Leo's, made just 2 days after they had refused me. $210,000, I emphasized every word. 3 times the amount that could have saved your granddaughter's life. You told me it was an investment in the future. I looked up at Leo. "How is that future looking now, Leo?" Leo stared at the floor, his ears burning red. I continued. The third sheet. The screenshot of Leo showing off his new watch. "While I was scrambling to raise money dollar by dollar, this is how my brother rewarded himself for his failure." Then came the fourth sheet. The fifth. My mother's boastful posts. The vacations. Finally, I placed the last piece of evidence on the table. The fatal blow. A copy of a flight confirmation to Miami. Passenger name, Leo. Date of flight, Friday, October 27th. 4 years ago. "The day of Lily's funeral," I said, my voice like ice. "This is why you left in such a hurry. A crypto conference. More important than saying a final goodbye to your own niece." No one said a word. There were no more excuses, no more justifications. Only the naked truth, laid bare on my coffee table. My mother was now sobbing uncontrollably. My father sat there, his face ashen, having visibly aged in just a few minutes. "I always wondered," I went on, my voice maintaining its frightening calm. "Why $21,000? Why that specific number?" But then I understood. You didn't just cover his losses. You gave him more money to start over. You were willing to write off a massive debt and invest even more in your son's failure. But you couldn't spare a third of that amount for your granddaughter's chance to live? I looked my father straight in the eye. "Now, I want to hear you say it out loud, so there's no more confusion. That day, when you had to choose between Leo's speculative future and Lily's life, what did you choose?" The silence stretched on. My father looked at my mother, then at Leo, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. There was only one path forward, the path through the truth. We chose Leo," my father finally choked out, his voice broken and full of shame. "We chose him." "We were wrong, Anna." My mother wept. "We were so wrong." The confession hung in the air. That was all I needed. The admission. Not an apology, but an admission of a conscious choice. They knew what they were doing, and now they had to face it. Their confession hung in the air, weak and pathetic. I didn't give them time to wallow in self-pity. My performance wasn't over yet. "All right," I said, my voice still steady. "Since you've admitted it, we can talk about help." A faint glimmer of hope flickered across their faces. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room, opened a drawer, and took out a checkbook. They followed my every move as if I were their savior. I sat down, filled in the date, and wrote a number. I returned to the coffee table and pushed the check toward them. My father reached for it, then froze. All three of them stared at the number I had written. $70,000. "This is—" my mother stammered. "It's not enough, Anna. We need 250,000. "I know," I replied. 250,000 is your problem. 70,000 is my problem. This is the amount you owe my daughter. I will lend you this amount, nothing more, nothing less. But there are conditions." My father looked at me, the desperation in his eyes greater than his surprise. "Any conditions?" "Excellent," I said, pulling a pre-printed stack of papers from my folder. "First condition. This is a written statement. I've already prepared it. It recounts the entire story. Your refusal to save Lily for $70,000 and your subsequent payment of $210,000 to Leo. All three of you will sign your names at the bottom." What do you want us to do with it?" my mother asked, her voice panicked. "Sign it," I repeated. "That's the first condition." Leo started to protest, but one look from me silenced him. "Second condition," I continued. "You will sell that house. I don't care how much you get for it. This $70,000 is to pay off the most urgent debts and find a cheap apartment to rent. Your life of luxury is over." "And the final condition?" I said, looking each of them directly in the eye. "You take this check. You sign this document. And you will disappear from my life. Forever. No birthdays, no Christmases, not a single phone call. We will never speak to each other again." The cruelty of my conditions finally sank in. This wasn't help. This was a sentence. They looked at each other, a silent dialogue passing between the three of them. I saw the struggle, the humiliation, and above all, the bottomless desperation. They had no other choice. My father was the first to pick up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed his name at the bottom of the statement. When it was my mother's turn, she broke down sobbing, her tears smudging the paper before she could finish signing. Finally, it was Leo. He signed angrily, his signature a furious scrawl. They had signed their own indictment. "Good," I said, collecting the signed statement. I pushed the check towards them. "Here you go." My father timidly took the check, as if it were a burning coal. They stood up, preparing to leave in silence and shame. "Oh, one more thing," I said, my voice strangely light. They stopped at the door and turned to look at me. I opened the laptop on my desk and swiveled the screen towards them. On the screen was a newly sent email. "What is that?" my father asked. "It's an email," I replied. "I just sent it. The recipients are Aunt Teresa, our uncles, our aunts, and about 20 of our family's closest friends, the people from Dad's club, the ladies from Mom's charity circle. Attached to that email is my entire evidence folder, and of course, the statement you all just signed." Their faces went as white as sheets. My mother staggered, having to lean on my father for support. "Why, Anna?" my father whispered, his voice shattered. "Why would you do that?" I stood up, smiling at them for the first time in 4 years, a smile with no warmth in it. "Because I want them to know the truth you've been hiding all these years. You will have $70,000 to live," I said, my voice a final judgment. But you will no longer have any honor to live with. I walked to the door and opened it wide. Now go. They walked out of my apartment like ghosts, completely devoid of life. I closed the door and engaged the security latch. The play was over. Justice my way had finally been served.